Good morning, and thank you for joining us for the Virtual Investor Roundtable event. My name is Janine Thomas. I'm CEO of JTC IR, and I will be the moderator for today's event. The Virtual Investor Roundtable is being hosted from November 16th through 18th. We have a lineup of 12 companies participating, so we encourage you to visit the website for that lineup at www.virtualinvestorco.com. It is my pleasure to join the Psychotherapeutics management team, Dr. Scott Fine, Chief Executive Officer, and Dr. Lisa Kems, Chief Medical Officer. But before we get started, I just want to remind our audience that Psychotherapeutics is publicly traded, and they list on NASDAQ under the ticker symbol CYTH. During today's discussion, we will be making forward-looking statements, and I encourage everyone to view the company's latest SEC filings on their website at cyclotherapeutics.com for the latest information. So to start, first, welcome, Scott and Lisa. So happy to have you join us today.
Thanks, Janine.
Of course. So Scott, I'd like to turn it over to you. I think it would be great if you can provide a little bit about your background, how you got introduced to Psychotherapeutics, and an overview of Psychotherapeutics and what you're currently working to develop.
Sure. So, well, first of all, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, Dr. Kims and I, and we're looking forward to telling you our story and getting to know you a little bit better, not only from the standpoint of who we are personally, but also with respect to what we've been building as a company. So look, I spent 40 years plus on Wall Street working in consumer and healthcare space, predominantly healthcare. I was very early in the generic drug industry. I was early in genetics. I spent a lot of time in medical devices. I got involved with Psychotherapeutics, and I'll tell that story in a quick moment. But I left Wall Street in 2014 to retire and set up my own family office. And literally a month after I retired, I was introduced to CTD Holdings, which was what Psychotherapeutics was known as then. And I was introduced because they were a platform company utilizing a cyclodextrin, which is a very elegant sugar molecule utilized across a broad spectrum of commercial utilizations, not only medical, but commercial. A lot of people are not aware that the active ingredient in the spray freshener Febreze is actually a cyclodextrin. And what was interesting about the company was they were public. They were doing about $1 million in revenue. They were profitable. The stock was at 2 or 3 cents a share at the time. But what was unique about them was they had been selling Trapsol Cyclo, as you folks know, our drug, for the treatment of an ultra-rare, then thought mostly pediatric disease, Nemanj type C, which I'll let Lisa get into the disease and describe it to you, but it's a terrible disease, affects the processing of cholesterol in the body. And what we recognized about this small little company in Gainesville, Florida, was that they had been selling through compassionate use INDs, meaning agencies had allowed them to utilize an experimental compound through an approved compassionate program with the FDA to administer this compound for the treatment of Nemanj type C. This got our attention because what they had was they had revenue from this product. They had sales from this product. They were selling it in the United States for the treatment of NPC. They were selling it specifically and exclusively to the country of Brazil for NPC. But what they didn't have was any data. There became our opportunity, because if they had been selling it, our theory was, for several years, there had to be data being assimilated somewhere. And if this data were there, could it be put into a dossier, perhaps, that could be then put forth to the EMA and the FDA to stand up potential clinical trials? So myself and our chairman, Marcus Seeger, and we'll talk a little bit about our board because of how diverse and how in-depth and how experienced our board is and global. Marcus runs a company called Polpharma, which is a privately held generic biosimilar company based in Warsaw, Poland, multi-billion-dollar business. And I called Marcus and I said, look, there's an opportunity for you and I, not for Polpharma, by the way, but for you and I, to possibly make an investment and perhaps look at this science, look at this medicine, and perhaps build out a clinical program and start to build a biotechnology company from what was then recognized as a specialty chemical business. So Marcus and I flew to Gainesville, Florida, and we listened to the founder of the company, Rick Stratton, and Jeff Tate, who was then the CEO of the company, talk to us about cyclodextrins. And they have a very elegant model. And in fact, we still utilize the model because we, to this day, generate about $1 million in revenue with our specialty chemical business with about 95% gross margin. So it actually throws off some nice cash for us. And their model was that they wanted to raise $500,000 to build out and expand this trading platform in cyclodextrins. So we listened very politely, and then we asked, can you tell us about Trapsol Cyclo, Nemanj type C? And of course, we both had gotten ourselves educated about the disease before we got there. And Rick got very excited and told us how a young postdoc named Benny Liu had done an animal model using a steroid as had used a cyclodextrin as control. And what he had discovered through 2 initiations of clinical programs in a mouse model was that the cyclodextrin prolonged life, enhanced the quality of life, and overall showed seemingly efficacy in a reduction of cholesterol when he biopsied these mice for the treatment of Niemann-Pick type C. So our pitch to Rick and Jeff was this. We'd put in the initial funding, $500,000, $250,000 from myself, $250,000 from Marcus. But we'd utilize that to put a team together to go out and harvest this data if it were out there. And as I'd said earlier, and if the data were robust enough, could we get enough advisors and clinical individuals that could write a protocol and submit to the FDA and the EMA? Could we stand up a clinical program? Well, fast forward, we were able to stand up a phase 1 in the United States, which we successfully completed. And we were able to stand up a phase 1, phase 2 clinical program, which we stood up in Europe. This, of course, has led us to where we are today. And look, the most important person on this call, Lisa, I hope you'll smile, is Lisa, because what drives the value for companies like ours is the science and the medicine. It's not the guy in the corner office. It's the woman in this instance. I say that very respectfully, driving the clinical program and driving our trial. Just a couple of other headlines that are very important before I pass on to Lisa. So we've taken this specialty chemical company, we've morphed it into a late-stage asset clinical orphan disease company. You've probably seen, if you haven't, I'd urge you to see the news. We did file our IND for Alzheimer's. We announced that this morning. We're quite pleased. So since we got involved in 2014, we've stood up a phase 3 and are enrolling and opening clinical trial sites around the world for the phase 3. Lisa is running that program. We've announced that we filed our IND application with the FDA today. Again, Lisa is also running that program. But we see ourselves as a platform technology. And yes, we are looking at other indications, but we're not going to be foolish. We're not going to spread ourselves too thin. We're a staff of 8 people, and we outsource. 90% of our work is outsourced by very key players. And before I pass on to Lisa or back to Janine, and I know you have all heard me say this, but it is my mantra. So who's the smartest guy in the room? The smartest guy in the room is me, because I've surrounded myself with smarter people. And Lisa is one of those people. And frankly, I think Janine in her space is smarter than I am. So I'm blessed to be here. I'm pleased to answer any questions. And I'll pass back to Janine. And again, I know Janine said we had an hour, but I could keep Lisa and I on this presentation for days, because we're so compassionate and so passionate about what we're doing to help patients, not only for Niemann-Pick type C, but also for Alzheimer's. Janine, back to you.
Thank you, Scott. You kicked off this call perfectly. Your energy is so great. And I do want to encourage Lisa, jump in as you see fit. But before we get there, first of all, Scott, congratulations on all of the progress so far. Really exciting about your pivotal study, and congratulations on the filing of your IND this morning. Great news for patients, great news for the scientific community. Let's go. You're right. Lisa is a gem. I can't wait for her to share her background. It's going to be important, I think, if we do that right now, Lisa, because this is going to set the stage for the rest of the discussion. Why you're here, why around the table, why you chose Cyclotherapeutics. So why don't we start with that? Dr. Kems, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Janine. Thank you, Scott. And good morning, good afternoon to the participants. It's a pleasure and privilege to be here. So my name is Lisa Kems. I'm the Chief Medical Officer, joined Cyclotherapeutics less than 2 months ago. Integral to my career, which makes me feel privileged and humble, has been throughout my tenure in the clinic and also as an investigator, as well as in the industry. Central to that has always been the patients, the subjects at risk, and being able to bring novel and safe, well-tolerated therapies out there to the tremendous unmet medical need that exists not only across broader indications, but in this instance also ultra-rare diseases. And throughout my tenure, I've had the privilege to work across many wonderful companies, large pharma such as Novartis, J&J, Eli Lilly. I have also worked in small biotechs, less than 20 people now, the smallest, but small is mighty. It's an outstanding team that Scott has built, and incredible expertise. And I have touched on across many therapeutic areas, ranging from inflammation, diabetes, metabolism, cardiovascular, inborn areas of metabolism, infectious diseases, central nervous system, and so forth and so on. But critical to this is to really understand the underlying disease, the pathophysiology, clinical signs and symptoms, what matters to the patients and the families, and what opportunities do you have. I'm a strong believer in targeted therapies, targeted drug development. And when I was approached by Cyclotherapeutics, if I was interested in this job, I had many other opportunities. And I chose Cyclotherapeutics for a number of critical reasons. The science is incredible. The Trapsol Cyclo carries a potential that in part is realized and in part is yet to be realized, not only across the two indications that we will discuss today, but also other indications to come. The vision and the mission and the commitment to patients and patient community, and to give healthcare providers options to prescribe therapies that effectively treat the underlying disease is very critical for me. And then, of course, the core values and the culture. You know, my job is my passion, and it's my life, so to speak. Not that I don't have a life outside of Cyclo, I do, but this is something that I am hugely invested in and hugely committed to. And so therefore it makes a tremendous difference to me that I can be here and lead together with my team the strategy and the execution on 2 development programs at each end of the spectrum of neurodegenerative diseases, Niemann-Pick disease type C, and also Alzheimer's disease. So I am 2 month in, and I couldn't be any happier. It's really been a wonderful journey so far.
Lisa, such an impressive background. You have, every major marquee, so to speak, Novartis, J&J, Lilly. The fact that you're a part of this team is incredible. And Scott has spent a lot of time building, really selecting key individuals around the table. So happy that you're a part of the team and so happy that you're joining us today. I think it makes sense for us to transition now into the lead program. So you had mentioned, you talked about the lead program for Niemann-Pick type C. Can you first, let's take a step back. Let's start from the beginning. Can you describe what Niemann-Pick type C disease is and who is affected?
Yes, I will be happy to. So Niemann-Pick type C disease meets the definition of what we will call an ultra-rare disease, with an epidemiology of about 1 in 100,000 being affected by the disease. So worldwide, 1 in 100,000, and about 9,000 cases or more worldwide. What is Niemann-Pick type C disease? It's an autosomal recessive genetic disease, which means that it occurs with same frequency overall in males and females. It is characterized by a defect in the NPC1 protein. So 90 to 95% of patients will have Niemann-Pick, will have a defect in the NPC1 protein and about 5% in the NPC2 protein. It's a rare disease, as I noted. It is progressive and it has fatal outcome if left untreated. And we will come to the treatment paradigm or lack of available therapies very shortly. What happens when you have Niemann-Pick type C disease? What happens is that cholesterol and lipids accumulates in cells of major organs and tissues, both in the central nervous system as well as peripherally or systemically, leads to, in brief, cell and tissue dysfunction, apoptosis, so cells dying, and it basically becomes a vicious cycle because the cholesterol that is synthesized cannot be metabolized and not excreted. Life expectancy is less than 5 years if you are diagnosed as a neonate or an infant, and it's 20 years if you are diagnosed as an adolescent. There's increasing diagnosis in later stages of life. Adults may present oftentimes as asymptomatic. So altogether, a very debilitating, very severe, and fatal disease that has a significant impact on patients and families, day-to-day life and quality of life.
Thank you so much for that background, Lisa. I think it's really important, to kind of set the stage there. And I know that, it's an important part of the company's mission and vision that I've heard Scott talk about all the time about providing hope to patients. And it sounds like these, the people living with NPC need and their families need hope. So I'd love to kind of transition the discussion towards that hope. So can you give us a little bit of background on how these patients are currently being treated and what do you see as the unmet need there?
The unmet medical need is as profound as can be, very similar to other ultra-rare diseases where I have led clinical development program, including the ones where I have led to successful approval. And in this situation, there is not a single therapy in the US or in Europe that is approved with effective benefits on both central and systemic, which are equally important in these patients. There's one therapy approved in Europe, Miclozad or Savesca. The effects there are uniquely in the central nervous system and not in the peripheral. And as I alluded to, you can only have a therapy, the therapy to be brought forward to these patients has to have systemic effects and central effects in order to treat the underlying pathophysiology of the disease and in order to have the potential for disease modifying effects or stabilization of this progressive disease. In addition to that, what these patients are currently, how these patients are currently treated per the clinical practice guidelines is really targeted relative to immobility, support them relative to swallowing with feeding tubes, physical therapy. Number of patients will present with epilepsy to make sure that it's well controlled with standard epileptic therapies. A number of them will present with cholestasis in the earlier patient segments. Earlier, the neonate and the infants will have progressive hepatic disease with cholestasis, so treating that. But treating in a holistic manner, the underlying course of the disease is yet to be accomplished. And this is why we have a very strong commitment to the patient community and to the healthcare provider to advance our program with Trapsol Cyclo, and we will come into the final detail of our strategy and approach shortly.
Well, that was extremely helpful. So, MPC, as you described, is a devastating disease, and there are no currently approved FDA-approved therapies in the U.S. The one in Europe. I'm wondering if you can just share with the audience what other programs are currently in development, in addition to the program that you're working on.
So, being obviously balanced and objective relative to the competition, right now we are the only company with pivotal registration trial, placebo-controlled. So our phase 3 is the only phase 3 that is actively moving forward. There are other companies that have executed phase 3 trials where they did not meet the primary efficacy endpoints, and there are other companies that are very early on in development. And so that is the current situation. And then, as I noted, there is miglustat, but only with a central effect and no peripheral or systemic effects. So right now, we have a great sense of urgency to serve this very significant unmet medical need. And therefore, we are extremely pleased that we have extremely well-designed, fit-for-purpose phase 3 study ongoing, fully aligned with the two major health authorities, the FDA and the EMA. And we can certainly touch on the criticality of the clinical endpoints and assessment in this trial, which are all tailored towards what the clinical signs and symptoms are in these patients. And of course, tailored towards becoming a chronic therapy. So therefore, also needs to have the appropriate benefit risk and being per the FDA and the EMA deemed as safe and well tolerated.
Thank you for that background. And I think it was a great setup for the rest of the discussion on the MPC study. So Scott, if we could just kind of give a setup on the regulatory pathway. So can you speak to your pathway to approval? And then we're going to get into some of the data discussion as well as the ongoing study at hand. So Scott, if you could just give us some background on the pathway.
Sure. So look, we are, as Lisa and I have spoken about, we are enrolling and opening sites around the world to complete enrollment of our clinical program for Niemann-Pick type C. We're not giving guidance on enrollment numbers and or patients at this point in time because it's just something we're not going to set precedent to do. But that's our pathway. We of course want to enroll as quickly as we can. I know I lost power, so I apologize. So maybe Lisa did mention, but we've set up our program where there'd be a 48-week interim analysis, and that's based on the historical phase 1, phase 1/2 data we've got, showing that at 48 weeks, specifically in the phase 1, phase 2 European trial, we showed good signs of efficacy. We're hoping to replicate that. So we've designed, working with the FDA and the EMA, an interim analysis at 48 weeks so that we can look at the data, and if it's as robust as we hope it's going to be and anticipate it's going to be, we can stop the study and go to registration. However, in the event we don't meet the clinical endpoints and need to power the study even further, we will continue on for another 48 weeks so that we can drive additional data. The agency and the FDA and the EMA actually have worked really closely with us. Frankly, we think because of their knowledge of the past failures that have come from the agency on failed attempts to get compounds approved, they've helped us with our trial design so that we can meet the most beneficial and factual way to get an approved product into this patient population. It's an arduous program, but it's one that we've decided to undertake and bear the expense of for the benefit of the patient population, to bring a treatment modality to this much needed patient population. And I'll make note, when we started in 2014, the field was very crowded. There was a lot of hope. Hundreds of millions of dollars have been thrown at the other programs. Literally, one program has had $500 million thrown at it, and its principal owner wrote it down by $267 million when it placed itself into bankruptcy. We've built what you're looking at as a company on less than $50 million. So not only have we been frugal with managing shareholder money, by the way, a lot of which has been our own money, myself, my families, and our board, But I think it's really important that, your audience and the investor group that are looking at our company understand how frugal we have been in maturing this company to where we have these 2 clinical phase assets at this point in time. I hope that answers your question. And
Yeah.
another thing I wanted to point out, and I was going to interrupt Lisa when she was talking about, where we are. And yes, we're the only enrolling phase 3 pivotal trial. There's a key factor here, which is a very important monetary factor. We qualify for a pediatric review voucher. I would think some of your audience know what a PRV is. It's a very interesting instrument created for orphan disease companies by the FDA. And they said, and it's technically a tool that says, if you get your drug approved and you're first in use as an active ingredient as a compound, we're going to give you a PRV, which is going to enable you to further fast track your work with us for your next generation of whatever your next compound is. It's that generic. However, they put a semicolon in there and said, but oh, by the way, if you want to transfer the rights that we're giving you, you can transfer that, which in other words means you can sell it. And so PRVs have been selling. Originally, they sold for $300 million, but the current market for a PRV is approximately $100 million, which we qualify for a PRV. And upon registration, we anticipate getting, which plays into, if you look at our valuation as an orphan disease company, which is $55 million. I know we're trading higher today on our news, which we're quite pleased with. But if you look at comparable companies that have orphan drug designation in the US, orphan drug designation in Europe, fast track designation, we've received PIP approval in Europe to give us an additional 2 years on our ODD exclusivity. If you look at that, and then you look also at the fact that we've filed a fairly broad patent application around our Alzheimer's program, which it's patent pending. If it issues, it'll give us protection through 2039. We've really encompassed and encircled this company, not only, as I said earlier, the most important factors, Lisa, with respect to the science and medicine, but also the business attributes in protecting our stakeholders. We're very comfortable, and we believe that we are demonstrably undervalued, not only as an orphan drug company, but frankly now as a recognized Alzheimer's entity. And I think it's very important. There's been plenty of recent press around Alzheimer's and cholesterol. I don't know whether Lisa commented on that, but we see ourselves as becoming one of the leaders in this space. And I'll make note of the fact that we just had Dr. Cindy Lemire from Harvard Brigham and Women's, which is where her lab is, a leading KOL in Alzheimer's research and discovery, join us as an advisor. And again, I think it's indicative of why someone like Lisa would join our company, or why someone like Cindy Lemire would join and put their name next to our company. I think it's key and it's important. And I think it's what will help us drive our value in the future.
Awesome. And you did hit on the pathway to approval from a regulatory standpoint. So just to summarize, because you had a lot of great comments there. So you've received orphan drug designation for MPC, you have fast track designation. You talked about the potential to secure a priority review voucher. All of that, really does add incredible value, but then also has a potential to expedite the approval process at all. So thank you for touching on all of those things. You did mention the data, and Lisa, I'd love to talk to you about some of the encouraging data with your lead program, Trapsil, Cyclo, and MPC. So can you talk a little bit about its history and provide an overview of the data generated to date?
Janine, I think we've lost Lisa this time. She'll be coming back.
Well, this is, we're having an issue dropping everyone. So you know what, Scott, I think you did touch on some of the data, but while we're waiting for Lisa to come back, I know you have had positive phase 1/2 data as well. You've had encouraging discussions with the FDA and EMA in order to move forward with your pivotal phase 3 program. You're calling it the Transport MPC study. So while we're waiting for Lisa to kind of rejoin us, I'd like to talk about your planning for success. So what is your overall commercial strategy plans for Trapsil, Cyclo, and MPC? Are you looking to commercialize on your own, or will you find a partner?
That's a really good question, Janine. It's a broad question. So if you've looked at our management team, you'll see that we have an acting commercial officer in Russ Belden. Russ spent 16 years at Genentech. He's been building out our commercial viability program and doing our epidemiology work. It's quite compelling. It's helping us to identify what the addressable financial market is potential, which is clearly in excess of $500 million in potential revenue. And we are looking at, how we will work with payers, how we will work with the countries in Europe and around the world to garner and build our revenue stream. And it's quite compelling, and it really would project us from the standpoint of, as we start and get the drug registered and generating revenue, we again, at that point, if we're still trading at the multiple that we're trading at, it'll really be ridiculous. But but we're also not naive. We're strategists. Look, I spent 40 years as an investment banker. M&A globally, M&A in healthcare. I'll sidebar, guys. I lived in Indonesia for 2 years, advising one of the largest privately held, now somewhat public because they took one of their companies public, the Tempo Group in Indonesia. I advised them on multiple M&A strategic transactions and strategic alliances around the world. And I think it's really key for us to pay attention to opportunities that may present themselves to us from a partnering standpoint. And I want to be very clear. I'm not making any public disclosure, but we understand that there perhaps is strength, especially as we move forward with our Alzheimer's program. And many of you have heard us talk about the Alzheimer's program as an asset, and we see it as an asset because we don't want to be perceived to let the marketplace think that we're going to stand alone and stand up a pivotal trial or a phase 2 trial for Alzheimer's. We're going to explore it. We're going to seek out various opportunities. We know there's multitudes of grant money available that we should look at. So we will open every door we can to build shareholder value and to protect our stakeholders as we look to do it in the most conservative fashion we can, while protecting our core competencies.
Well, that makes sense. I certainly have heard you refer to the Alzheimer's disease program as an asset, and I think it makes sense to kind of set the stage for how investors should view that. On that note, why don't we, and while we're waiting for Lisa to rejoin, why don't we transition onto the conversation onto Alzheimer's? So congratulations on your news this morning for announcing the filing of your IND for the treatment of Alzheimer's. Can you just give us a little bit of background? I know you provided news several months ago about a successful Type B meeting with the FDA. So just give us a little bit of background, talk about the program, talk about the plans to move forward, and then we can get into additional questions.
Sure. So first of all, a little bit of background, if you hadn't known. So we were approached by a family who had a this is coming back. Yep. Whose family member was afflicted with Alzheimer's, and not dissimilar to the compassionate use programs for Niemann-Pick type C. We were approached by this family with a physician, Dr. Diana Kerwin, with the request that would we stand up our a single-use N of 1 compassionate use program for the treatment of Alzheimer's for this patient. And since Lisa's back, I'm just going to give the headline and then let her run with the science and again the medicine to describe what we saw. But we agreed to do this. The patient was on the drug for 18 months, and as many people know, late onset geriatric Alzheimer's patients decline across the board, and there's a mini mental state study that is done. And in this instance, over 18 months, not only did we not see a decline, but we actually saw an improvement in this patient. Armed with the safety data that we've got through over 15 years of utilization of data of Trapsol Cyclo through compassionate use programs and through our clinical programs, as well as armed with a mouse model that was done by a Dr. Flintfield, late Flintfield, he passed away, who was the head of neurology at Cornell, utilizing subcutaneously a beta-cyclodextrin in a mouse maze, showing that those mice that were induced with beta-cyclodextrin performed much better in this mouse water maze. Armed with that, we wrote a dossier, filed a protocol, and went to the FDA, and the outcome is as you see today. And why don't I ask Lisa to talk more specifically about the science and where we're going to take it from there.
Thank you, and my sincere apologies. My internet completely cut me off for 5 minutes, so I really do apologize for that.
Well, we're happy you're back. So
yes, so am I. So I just want to make sure, have we? Do you need me to go back and talk a little bit about the phase 3 trial in NPC, or focus now on Alzheimer's?
Yeah, I think let's stick with this theme, and then we can jump back and forth just while we're on it. So if you could just maybe start off with the kind of the background on Alzheimer's disease, the challenges from development, and then an overview of your development plan.
Yeah, I will be happy to. And again, my apologies. So there are a number of similarities between Niemann-Pick disease type C, also referred to oftentimes as childhood dementia, and Alzheimer's disease, which of course is affecting adult patients, usually from the age of 50 and onwards. So when you look at the biology, there are similarities relative to the impact on cholesterol metabolism, which is emerging with very rapidly with data that highlights the role of disrupted cholesterol synthesis also in patients with Alzheimer's disease. There is the similarity of presentation of amyloid beta plaques in the brain, as well as with tau, which is a protein that is affiliated also with effects on the neurons and disease progression in NPC, and is related to disease presentation in Alzheimer's disease. When you look at the clinical signs and symptoms between Niemann-Pick type C disease and Alzheimer's, there's a similarity, of course, first and foremost with dementia. Either diagnosis, presentation of cognitive impairment or developed cognitive impairment. It's important to note that for both diseases, premature death, sadly so, is also a common denominator between the two diseases. And then, of course, the impact on quality of life that is in existence, just in brief, for both of these two diseases. So keeping Cyclo in mind, I consider our molecule to be established as a well-tolerated, innovative, and efficacious drug product for Niemann-Pick type C disease, and beyond the single patient we have treated with Alzheimer's disease, upon FDA clearing our IND to proceed into a very well-designed, I would say, cutting-edge phase 2b trial in patients with Alzheimer's disease. And so when you look at Alzheimer's disease, just in brief, is the role of cholesterol metabolism at the central level, and the correlation that you see with 24S-hydroxysterol, which is a cholesterol that is uniquely found in the brain, and then, or is formed in the brain and then can be measured in plasma. That is elevated not only in patients with Niemann-Pick type C disease, but also in Alzheimer's disease. We have very robust data with Cyclo on the effect with 24S-hydroxysterol in NPC patients. And of course, that's another link yet to the common disease pathophysiology. And also it has been demonstrated in additional studies in patients that have diseased with Alzheimer's disease, cellular deposits of cholesterol found in various regions of the brain. So altogether, we find that the scientific rationale is very strong and very compelling to enter into the other end of the disease spectrum for neurodegenerative diseases. And being a physician and I think a savvy drug developer, like with any complex disease, such as Alzheimer's disease, and when you also think about non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, which is currently not what we are treating, but there are some similarities in the sense that there will be no single magic bullet or single treatment that effectively will target any of these diseases, but absolutely Cyclo getting to the core of aspects of Alzheimer's disease, in my opinion, has a very good probability of technical success, supported by an extremely well-designed phase 2 study.
That was perfect, Lisa. Thank you so much for that overview and explanation. So with that, so you file the IND. It's exciting because if once it's cleared by the FDA, you have the potential to move into a phase 2 clinical study. Can you provide an overview of the overall development plan for your Alzheimer's disease asset?
Yes, I will be happy to. So, of course, we will await the FDA clearance of our IND, which will then allow us to proceed with the standard development activities that we have all mapped out, and also plans in place relative to the clinical research organization that will support our trial. We have a good sense of the countries we want to go into. And of course, we have a very clear view on how we are going to evaluate the data that will be derived from this trial. Data that's similar to our NPC program is focused on highly relevant clinical endpoints, both functional endpoints, markers of target engagement relative to our molecule, disease-relevant biomarkers, and test evaluations of patients' daily functional level, as well as quality of life. Needless to say, for with any molecule, critical assessment, or I would say frequent assessment of safety and tolerability, is also an integral part, as that remains a number one priority for us, that the drug that gets out there is going to meet the requirements in that regard.
Wonderful, thank you. So with that, let's move to Scott. You had mentioned earlier in the discussion that you had appointed a senior advisor for the Alzheimer's disease program. Can you give a little bit about a background of Dr. Lemire and what her appointment means for this program?
Well, I think it's clear. So we wanted to reach out and identify a leading KOL in the space who could give us the independent views and give us guidance as we not only look at our clinical program, but also look at who else should be involved with our program, who else is looking at cholesterol in the space. Cindy knows these people and works with these people on a constant basis. We also know that she's got strong ties and sits on many advisory boards as well as many independent Alzheimer program initiatives where we can, through her, harvest a wealth of knowledge and accessibility to help our program, to make sure that we're crossing the right T's and dotting the right I's as we go down this very difficult but significant program for us. So she brings that scientific capabilities, but she also brings that common sense, frankly, knowledge of what's been out there in the marketplace, what's being perceived by other KOLs as being front leaders in the world around Alzheimer's. And I have to say we've spent some time with her since she's joined us. It's only been a short period of time, and she's dove in with both feet. She's a true treasure to deal with. So that's a global view of how we see her giving us her guidance, her good guidance, frankly. I see we've lost Lisa again.
Yeah. And so that's really helpful with that. So, you mentioned it previously, and I know I brought it up that you've referred to the Alzheimer's disease program as an asset. So it really leads me to believe that you have big plans for this Alzheimer's disease program. Can you go into that a little bit further?
I can, but as I said earlier, look, we are in exploratory phase right now with respect to what is the best approach to take this asset, to get it to the marketplace as quickly as possible, so we can help and benefit the patient population. We've got a strong history of safety data around the drug Trapsol Cyclo because of Nemanj type C. We know there's a huge unmet need, not only, of course, in NPC, but also for Alzheimer's. But as I'd said, we and our team have a broad, and our board, by the way, very involved, very hands-on board. I speak to Marcus Seeger, our chairman, almost daily, and he lives in Zurich, Switzerland. So he's in constant touch with me, as well as other board members as well. We understand the prospect and the value of possibly identifying partners to help us build out some of these programs. So we'll pay attention to that with respect to looking at opportunities that can help us mature these programs and make sure that the economics of these programs work to the benefit, first and foremost, to our stakeholders and our shareholders, but also could be fair to other entities that may want to join us. And look, when you move programs ahead, similar to what we've done today by announcing the filing of the IND, it shows progression because, again, common sense. The practicality of getting the IND filed, the meetings with the FDA, these are very complex, very involved, very scientific, very detailed meetings that I'm sure most of your audience can appreciate. But until you're in the trench and drafting these documents and drafting these protocols and understanding the amount of work that goes into standing up these types of programs, you really can't appreciate it. And there's value there. And it's value that has to be recognized first, again, from the science and the efficacy standpoint by the agencies to enable you to move forward. But we know that the right eyes from a partnering standpoint possibly are looking at us too. So sorry for the long-winded answer, but I hope I'm answering your question. We will pay attention to those types of inquiries.
Yeah, no, that was a perfect response. So from what you explained today, Trapsol Cyclo really could be a platform technology. Do you see it having utility in other indications outside of NPC and Alzheimer's disease?
We do, and we've had long discussions with our IP counsel, Goodwin Proctor, around the what ifs and the who and the wheres. We are looking at other indications. It's broad. We are being approached by other groups that are looking at their own indications and wanting to use Trapsol Cyclo as a combination, not as a therapy, but as an adjunct to look to build out other programs in a myriad of different disease categories. Again, we're not going to spread our bandwidth of our team. We're 8 people, too thin. But we do want to pay attention because we do want to expand the platform because we have every intention of building a very large biotechnology pharma company. Utilizing Trapsol Cyclo as a platform. And look, we've already taken Trapsol Cyclo from Nemanj type C to Alzheimer's, which is, if you think about it in its own right, it's kind of unique because we've gone from an orphan disease to probably one of the largest diseases from the standpoint of affliction and cost. So it's I think we've earned our wings in respect of ourselves because we've accomplished that at this point in time.
And I imagine you have a scientific advisory board that has some, world-renowned leaders associated with the company. I'm sure you leverage that team as well as you look to expand into the utility into additional indications. You've mentioned the team so many times. I mean, you guys have really executed operationally pretty exceptionally over the past year, 12 to 18 months. If you think about it, launching, getting the data from your phase 2 study, having conversations with FDA and other regulatory agencies, putting together the protocol and design and getting clearance to proceed with your pivotal phase 3 Transport NPC program, launching, opening sites, launching the study. You mentioned the team, and I'd love for you to highlight, who you have around the table. If you think about everything that's been accomplished, I think it's important for our audience to know, the team that you've assembled, because it is quite impressive.
So, you mentioned our scientific advisory board. So our chairwoman is Dr. Rita Caldwell, who Rita ran the National Science Academy. I mean, she's probably the most preeminent scientist in the United States, female scientist in the United States. It's co-chaired by our Chief Scientific Officer, Dr. Sharon Renko. Sharon was 21 years at the NIH, left as the deputy director of the Fogarty. She's a neurologist by training but she left the bench. But she was an appointee of PCAST, the President's Council of Scientists. One of the most prestigious scientific communities you can be aligned with. I think it's really important with our SAB, 2 members, Dr. Caroline Hastings. Dr. Hastings is the clinical oncologist, hematologist who worked with the Hempel family, and there's no HIPAA issues here. This is all over the web, and the Hempels are very close to our company and friendly to our company. Caroline wrote the first compassionate use program for the Hempel twins to get beta-cyclodextrin trapsol cyclo administered to these twin girls, which did prolong their life when they were first dosed. And Caroline also obtained the orphan drug designation. And when we went to her and said, "Would you assign it to us?" She assigned it to us. She didn't ask for a penny. She said, just tell me you're going to mature this and bring it so that we can get a treatment modality into the marketplace. We did that. It's also important. The young scientist, Benny Liu, who's now a gastroenterologist, but the guy that did the animal model, that wrote the seminal paper around the utilization of beta-cyclodextrin for the treatment of Niemann Pick type C, he's on our scientific advisory board. Jerry Cox, who was our interim chief medical officer, former senior officer at Sanofi Genzyme, leading their lysosomal storage group. Jerry, did a great job as our interim CMO, helped us find Lisa, by the way. But did Jerry want to leave? No, he's now on our SAB and working with us and, looking at other indications, as you pointed out, and also helping us with our 2 initial programs as it is. So, people get involved with the company because they see the depth of the science. And, I love to quote Mike Lishak. Mike is a member of our management team, as you folks know. He's our head of global regulatory. He's our head of business development. When I was interviewing Mike to join us, because he's going to leave Sanofi Genzyme and join this small biotechnology company. He's a young guy. He's got young kids. He's taking a risk to join this small company. I asked him, I said, "Mike, why? Tell me." I mean, I get it, Mike. It's exciting, but he said, "Scott, I like the molecule. The molecule works." He said, "It's so compelling around this molecule." And that's resonated with me. And other people have heard me say it before, but it's a very powerful statement, especially from a guy that's been in the rodeo and been in that trench before and looked at failed molecules. And he had the capability of looking at our data and looking at, what we were and how we were performing. So it's really quite compelling. And, and again, our board of directors, Patrick Ostranik, who is the CFO of US Pharmacia, another large healthcare group out of Eastern Europe. And by the way, one of our largest investors, if not our largest investor, and the board's been, hands-on, very supportive, throughout this building process that we've started in 2014. And, look, all of us are, very long-term, but all of us have known that if we wait for the rewards, they'll come. So we anticipate that they'll be coming.
Okay. So that was perfect. And it was a lot, and it really informed our audience. And I think it's, how important it is to have all of those people around the table endorsing the company, working with the company, guiding the company, but putting their careers on the line. I think that really, you can't say any more than that. Congratulations on that. I think, when you think about what we talked about today, and I agree with you. I actually wish we had 2 more hours because there's so much to this story, and appreciate your time going through everything. But, you have the potential, first FDA approved treatment for NPC. You're the front runner, the front horse in the race. That's so exciting. You have, you filed your IND, as Lisa talked about, differentiated approach, data to support the transition into Alzheimer's disease, huge opportunity, but a real need for solutions for all of those patients. Congratulations on all of your progress. But why don't we talk about what investors can expect in 2022, and why are you excited about the future of Psychotherapeutics?
Well, look, I can't get specific, Janine, as you know, under Reg FD and all of those things that I also have to pay attention to. But look, we think there will be several key milestones We think there'll be a couple of additional key milestones before the end of this year, by the way, so stay tuned. But we think we're going to hit several key milestones next year, which should be value inflective on our value in our company. I say that kind of tongue in cheek because we continue to release really good news, and our value hasn't caught up with it. But I've been to that rodeo too before, where stocks stagnate for years. I'll use Green Mountain, by the way, as an example. I took Green Mountain public at a $10 price. It traded at $20 for about a year, and then it traded sub $5 for 5 years, and that sub $5 stayed there. And then, with the turn of a key and a strategic acquisition in this thing called Krueg, Dr. Pepper bought it for $22 billion. So, patience, understanding your value. We're building value, guys. We're building assets. We're cross-validating what we're doing. We're trying to minimize risk in the portfolio. And as we look to do this, so that's the best answer I can give for that question, Janine.
That's perfect. So I see that we do have some questions that have come in. We are going to transition to the Q&A portion. We took up a lot of time today. I think it was valuable, to have the discussions that we had. Scott, really appreciate your time there, as well as Dr. Kim's. We are going to get to a couple questions. We do have quite a few that have come in. So to the audience and to those that have submitted, we will get back to you on each of the questions that have submitted. We're just not going to be able to get to them, the majority of them, because we're almost at the top of the hour, and we do have to remain on schedule for this conference. So first question that would come in is, can you share with us some of the things that you achieved by attending the CTAD conference recently?
Well, okay, so to be specific, I did not attend the CTAD conference. I went up for a dinner, which I truly enjoyed, with Cindy and Sharon, but I know the report I got from both Cindy, Sharon, and Dr. Kim's, who were in attendance. By the way, just full transparency, not attending with Cindy, but by themselves. There were several contacts made, and there were several interactions. And of course, as we've all been reading, people more and more are paying attention to cholesterol and its effect on Alzheimer's. So it was a good fact-finding mission, and there were good contacts made there scientifically, which I think is the first and foremost, as well as possibly strategically.
Excellent. And then we do have time for one more question before we have closing remarks. Will you be expanding your MPC clinical trial sites into Europe?
We already are in Europe, and the answer is yes. We will be adding additional sites, but we are already in Europe as well as in Israel, in the Middle East. So the answer is 100% correct. Excellent.
Scott, we appreciate your time today. Definitely feel your enthusiasm for the company, your commitment to the company, commitment to shareholders, and really importantly to the patient communities for MPC and Alzheimer's disease. We did lose Lisa during the process with an internet issue. We are so grateful for her time. What a great addition to the team. You really should be so proud of what you've done and all that you've accomplished. And we look forward to following the company for over the next year, and really think that there are exciting times to come. So do you have any closing remarks before we?
I just want to thank everyone that's joined us for the call. And if you have follow-up questions, please do send them in. If I can answer them, I will. We love to talk about this company. We are very grateful for the support of our shareholders, all of you. And I look forward to talking to everyone again.
Wonderful. Thank you, Scott. Really appreciate your participation in the roundtable. With that, this concludes our virtual investor roundtable with Psychotherapeutics. I would like to thank Scott Fine and Dr. Lisa Kems of Psychotherapeutics for joining us today. Just a reminder, this is the first day of the roundtable event. Please visit virtualinvestorcode.com for the remaining schedule. We are on from the 16th through the 18th. And we have a great lineup of companies to participate. Once again, Psychotherapeutics is traded on NASDAQ under the ticker symbol CYTH. We appreciate the audience involvement, of the participation, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.